Hello, gentlemen and lady. This is Driver Bob. Just keep it short and sweet like Dick likes it.
Oh, thank you very much, Driver Bob, for calling in. That's I think that's one of our best voicemails ever. Thank you for keeping it short and sweet, just like I like it.
Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shadow TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shadow TV Westworld Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO show Westworld. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And this is our fan email edition where we look back on this week's Westworld episode and provide our feedback on the top listener emails and voicemails for the week. This week's episode was entitled Les Ecorches. You spent an hour listening to our ideas on Tuesday's Deep Dive. Now it's our turn to hear from you. And in this edition, Big D has built in all sorts of new features we're going to experiment with tonight. Plus, the audience is tying things together with some chunky-ass theories. You ready for this one, Big D?
As we're getting towards the end here, the home stretch, it's, the tinfoil is becoming a bit more refined. There's less crazy random theories and more extrapolations on existing ones. But there is a group of about 4 emails that I weave together. And against your wishes, by God, we're gonna sneak that in here.
On Sunday nights, right after Westworld airs, we do an Instacast edition. Then on Tuesday, we have our deep dive where we go deeper into the ideas that we discussed on the Instacast. This is our Telegraph where we will go through reader mails. Again, if you don't hear your email and it wasn't selected for this week's Telegraph, that doesn't mean it's garbage. It just means we didn't have enough space. All of them will be on the website, shoutouttv.com, where you can read them in their entirety. Also, some of them have been shortened so we can fit more into the episode. That being said, Big D, if you're ready, let's roll that Telegraph. Okay, our first one comes from Jonathan Baer, and he says, at any point in the show, has it been referenced of any other narrative writer than Sizemore? Primarily anyone before Sizemore. Additionally, has his age ever been referenced? Looking at him, I'd put him in his late 30s or early 40s. Now, if very little changes have been made to all the host narratives so as to act as a constant for the variables that are the guests, then how could Sizemore be the sole character and content creator for the past 30 years of the park's operation? This would mean, A, there was something or someone writing the narratives pre-Sizemore, and that he has brought in later or newer stories and characters. B, Sizemore was a literary prodigy and was hired by Delos to write the narratives as a child. Or C, and I hate to play this card, Sizemore is a host.
Okay, so this episode, we got a little more info between the conversation of Dr. Ford and Bernard in the Cradle, that the humans are the experiment and the hosts are the constant, that the loops are meant to cause the human variables to be the measure. So you needed to have the characters on these cyclical stories so that each time the person came into the park, the way they responded would help act as almost a fidelity test. So with that, 30 years ago, they could have had a writer who wrote out the narratives, and then for 30 years, or maybe the last 15 years, Sizemore's just been making minor tweaks. Or like his terrible Red River Blood Arroyo narrative, it just gets shot down. But it wouldn't take much work to do minor modifications.
Yeah, in fact, it might be a smokescreen, right? You have Sizemore working on Odyssey of the Red River. Ford can then just reject it. Maybe that's why Ford was so adamant about his rejection of it, was that they're saying, oh yeah, we're trying some new stuff, but really Ford wants to stick to those same core stories. But it is interesting, like, did Ford write those stories or was there somebody else behind it?
Yeah, but remember, like the robbery of the Mariposa with Hector and Armistice. The second time through, Sizemore got all fired up because he gave this eloquent speech for Hector, and then he gets shot. So he could spend his whole days just changing minor things, think he's impacting the narrative, but really in the big picture, he's not doing much.
Thanks for your Telegraph, Jonathan. Next up, we have Steve Morse. And Steve writes, We analyze Shakespeare after we read a sonnet or play, then go back to pick apart the scenes and dialogue. Since we can read or view a play in a few hours, the analysis stage comes quickly. On the other hand, tearing apart a series like Westworld on the fly, where the cliffhangers are varied and plentiful, and it's a week or years for some resolution, is also fun. The surreality of this series gives us elbow room for ongoing interpretations and predictions. So far, Westworld is excellent science fiction, like an Ursula K. Le Guin novel, but a 5-season series over 10 years demands an extraordinarily engaging story. My hope is to look back on the story and analyze it for its meaning and view of the human condition, much as I do Shakespeare's plays or Battlestar Galactica. I always ask, does this story say something universal about our common humanity that energizes and informs the reader or viewer? Me. I have no complaint now.
Yeah, and I think I experience this on a micro level at each episode, that I find that I'm always trying to jot down notes for the podcast and trying to figure things out instead of just sitting back, watching it. I think watching it a first time without notes in the Instacast would be better. And then the second time, go through and look for the little nuggets. And that's what we're doing with the series on a whole, on a complete scale. So I'm hoping season 1, there was no guarantee of a season 2. Now that there's, even though the viewership's down a bit, we're pretty confident that HBO is going to give it the run of the 5 seasons. I think we're going to see a nice course correction back to a more traditional storytelling that in the end, I think will be rewarding.
I'm really glad you wrote this Telegraph, Steve, because I was literally having this same conversation earlier this week, and my take on it was a little bit different in the sense that with Shakespeare, I thought about when I go and see Shakespeare live, and I'm a big Shakespeare fan, and whenever I see a play for the first time, even if I've read it before, whether it's The Tempest or King Lear, I'll watch it, and when I'm watching it, I'm not analyzing the play. I'm not thinking of all the references, historical and literary and mythological, but afterward, or when I read it in text, is when I really dig into it. And one of my favorite classes in college and in high school was anything related to Shakespeare, because I love that dissection of the copy. But when I'm watching the play, I don't do that. So I do think I almost do a disservice to Westworld in attempting to, basically vivisect it before it's had a chance to live its entire life. All right, next up we have Joseph Rossmiller, and he writes a quick one. He says, "Hey guys, remembering the riddle of the Sphinx, I wonder if the valley might not contain the grave," and like Cradle, it's GR4VE, generated realities for virtual eternities. Just a thought, Joseph Rossmiller.
I like it. It makes sense. There has to be an acronym for the hidden, facility that's under the water, and it would make sense. I mean, do you think it's a bit cheesy? Is it a bit too much on the head?
We know that Ford has a flair for the dramatic, so it very easily could be. What's great about it, though, is if you do have Cradle and Grave as your 2 simulated environments, the soundtrack options are limitless.
And I don't know if it was is he mentioning not the actual riddle of the Sphinx, but the episode riddle of the Sphinx?
No, he's talking about the riddle of the Sphinx as well, like, from baby to adult to old man.
Oh, I'm thinking it's more the riddle that Lawrence's daughter gives the Man in Black, and says if you're looking forward, you're looking the wrong way, and that it, people had thought it was looking back in time or how it could be related from birth to death. So it could be that as well, but it's possible.
All right. Thanks for keeping it short and sweet, Joseph. Next up, we have James from Delaware. James writes, "The hosts are bred to do one thing extremely well: read people and persuade them. We see Angela read young William in the hat room and say all the right things to Logan at the sales pitch party. We see Maeve get reassigned after failing to convince guests in the Mariposa to ride her pony. We later see her persuade the shit out of Felix and Sylvester, Lee, and even fellow hosts Hector and Lawrence. Furthermore, the ability to persuade fits with Delos' objective of sampling a rich set of their guest behaviors, i.e., getting them to do anything and everything. So, if Angela can't get enough of a rise out of a security guy for him to lower his guard, then she isn't performing up to specifications."
Yes, I agree with that. They're the ultimate sales tool. But the problem is you have to have a willing participant, a customer who's in there. And that QA member, it's stupid. But that made me think back to my time in the military. And it was one of the things that disappointed me about serving is in the 101st Airborne, I figured more people in the combat arms were going to be proficient. They were going to be, a little better tactically proficient than other normal soldiers, and other less active units. But I was saddened to find that a lot of the soldiers to the left and the right of me weren't always the brightest or the best soldiers out there. Now take that a step forward. You're now hiring these guys as mercenaries. They probably weren't the best to begin with. So is the quality that the QA has for what they're paying, is it possible?
Yeah, James, I don't necessarily disagree with the fact that it's possible that Angela could persuade this guy, or even that that's really her job and she should be able to do it. But the challenge of making a television show or a film is that you have to convince the viewer, right? And I think that was the big problem, was that you need to make a scene that is fire, right? That is the most tempting, most irresistible thing you've ever seen. You need to make us feel what that QA member is feeling to understand why. And I think that it just didn't jump off the screen that way. I wasn't convinced the whole time. My disbelief, the alarm was going off saying, nah, that wouldn't happen.
No, and you remember that you and I had a conversation after the episode aired, and we were remembered back to Maeve and Hector in the Mariposa, when Maeve realizes that something's wrong and that she wakes up the final time and she's awake. When she seduces Hector, she's sitting on top of the safe. She spreads her legs. She pulls him in. She seduces him. It's a little different situation, but this robot standing with her back to you, you've just watched her butcher her friends. They should have sold it better to make us believe it.
I think back to, and I'm going to date myself here, but I think back to Basic Instinct. Yes. And when I watched Basic Instinct and I see Sharon Stone, and I know she's, spoiler alert, a killer, I'm still I'd probably still do it. Like, that you're going to get ice picked to death, but you're like, looks pretty good.
I hope you're not just talking about the leg spreading in the police station.
No,
you're talking
the overall seduction.
Overall, I agree. She's got the nice house on the out on the coast. She's driving the Lamborghini, or it was maybe a Lotus. Yeah, there was something. You knew she was dangerous, but she was sexy. I don't know that we got that from Angela at that point.
All right, thanks for your telegraph, James. Next up, we have Jeff S., who writes, "Hey guys, Ford fundamentally confirmed my analysis of the Cradle. I am so smart. SMRT. In my previous email, I thought the Cradle's chief job was to store and iterate the host's mind through simulations in order to force the emergence of AI. I also theorized that the saved guest brain and behavior data was what was used to catalyze that emergence. According to Ford, however, the primary purpose of the Cradle was human brain data storage and preparation for host body integration. In that situation, host artificial intelligence is a side effect of the Cradle, not the primary goal. We can now be fairly certain of the nature of this weapon that Dolores is seeking, a cache of host bodies based on the humans that have been saved as data by the park. Rich and powerful humans that our band of robo-rebels can inhabit to infiltrate the world outside the park in order to dominate our world. Mwahahaha. Cheers, Jeff."
Well, we remember that when the hosts that are floating in the bay, that a third of them have virgin control units that have never been touched. It would make sense that those 13 had been pulled out and stuck into something. And it would be ideal if it was let's say a clean body, a body of someone who wouldn't be suspected, someone who has an identity out in the real world. If you want to disappear, that would probably be the best way to do it.
We got to remember that in what was being stored with the humans wasn't just their consciousness, but also DNA. The idea was eventually you'd make a hybrid body, and then you would put your consciousness back into it and be able to exist. So part of the reason that the host would obviously want that as a weapon is it allows them to get out of the park without detection. I think that's the key thing. But also, you've got to think about why they would blow up the Cradle. And I was puzzling over that for a while because it seems counterintuitive, right? You're Dolores. You've got a backup in the Cradle. If you die, they could bring you back from the Cradle. But they're not bringing back the Dolores that's been out in the world, that's been changed. They can actually bring back old Dolores, the backup of Dolores. And if that's the case, that is a chain. That is a chain that binds because they know that you're replaceable now. They know that if they take you out, they'll just make another one just like you. And more importantly, that data on you, let's say that includes schematics, blueprints, how to make you. So if you destroy that, then you're much harder to detect in the real world because they don't have a signature on you.
Yeah, and that would be a rolled back version of Dolores. So they can roll her back before she actually had the breakthrough that allowed her to become aware and sentient. The reason why these bodies would be sitting there in storage, and people are saying, why would you be producing them if you haven't, the process doesn't work. The process is 2 steps. One is creating the body, and then also creating the facsimile of the person's personality. It's never going to be completely perfect. The problem they're having is step 2, which is the transfer from the digital VR version, which is stable, into the body. That's what they've been working on with James, Delos, and the experiment there. There's no reason that you would hold back on the production facility because, it would make logical sense that it takes time to actually construct the body fiber by fiber and cell by cell. So why not start production ahead of time on all the bodies? Then once you perfect the process, you got all the bodies just sitting in there, boom, drop them in, they're ready to go.
Also, remember that we put the expiration date of, roughly 35 days based on what we saw with James Delos in his hybrid host body in Riddle of the Sphinx. Remember, the host is different. An awakened host isn't necessarily a human consciousness, right?
Yep.
It's something very different. It might be perfectly at home in a hybrid body.
Giant cold storage. Let's see it.
All right, next up, we have one from Grambo. Grambo says, Maeve once again finds her way to the cabin with her daughter, and of all people, the man in black just stumbles on in. Obviously, Ford is in control of all the different stories going on in Westworld and slowly bringing them together. But that's not my point of bringing that up. In that scene, where's Artemis and Hector and the rest of the gang? They were just up on a hill near Maeve going to her daughter before Ghost Nation shows up, and then she ran away. You'd think that they would have tried to follow her at any cost, given that Ghost Nation didn't seem to be hostile, and wouldn't be able to stop them from following Maeve to the site of the man in black, Maeve and Lawrence, all-out gun battle, just a 30 seconds run away from their location. And how is the man in black still alive? What does this show up to? Obviously, Gremley will show up to patch him up the next episode, but it still seems wacky.
No, you had the answer. They gave it to you right there. So Maeve goes off. She's chasing the man in black. Sizemore calls in the squad. They pick him up in the buggy. They come into town and shoot. It would make sense then that Hector, Artemis, Felix, Sylvester are all in tow, coming behind on foot. So now that the buggies have tore ass out of town, they're going to come across the man in black. You have 2 techs that are used to repairing bodies. We've seen the technology works on a human body because the man in black did it with that med kit behind the wall in the bar. So the 2 of them are going to sit down and patch him up. They have to.
Sometimes the transitions are a bit jumpy in Westworld, and I think that's actually a bit of an understatement. So I was left wondering the same thing. I expected during the battle between Lawrence and the man in black and Maeve that the intervention was going to be Hector, an armistice. I didn't think it was going to be the buggies jumping in. It seemed like the distance between Maeve and the rest of her party was much bigger than we expected.
Yeah, but either way, if someone comes to save the man in black, whoever's performing that medical procedure should know whether he is human or host. And hopefully at that point, we'll figure it out.
All right. Thanks for your Telegraph, Grambo. Next up is Tom from North Carolina. And Tom writes, Hey, everyone. I love the episode, but before I say anything else, can this QA storyline and story arc be done with? I overheard a comment about how these guys are the rejects from the Imperial Stormtrooper tryouts, and I think it fits perfectly. Every QA scene starts to feel like an 80s B action film with how disposable and useless they are. It's really the only flaw in the show I have, though, which is a good thing. Anyway, are we to assume that Bernard being interrogated by Hale is the same one we saw presumably moments before walking the halls with Elsie? You overhear the shootout with QA happening while Bernard is being controlled or influenced by Ford, so you know that the period of time between Bernard shooting the QA guy at the behest of Ford and the time he's being waterboarded are very close. It seems obvious that the Bernard being tortured is the Bernard being controlled by Ford too, and that Ford is trying to lure them all into a trap by telling them the location. But is there a chance that we are dealing with 2 different Bernards in the same timeline? One from the outside seems composed since Ford is controlling him, while the other feels sheepish. Unless this is what Ford is purposely trying to portray to fool them, it seems a bit odd. Thanks, Tom from North Carolina.
No, I think Tom's got it mixed up here, right? So Elsie and Bernard, they enter into the Mesa, and Elsie made the comment, it's been a week, what the hell are they still shooting at? Or that was Charlotte, but it was still that same time frame. It's only been a week, because the later scenes that we see, when Bernard re-enters the Mesa, he's reintroduced again to Charlotte. He this time is coming in with Strand. They comment about the Cradle being destroyed. That is after the initial entrance of Bernard into the Cradle, where he gets his control unit taken out. So there's at least 4 to 7 days that have passed. The interrogation is happening after Strand had gotten him down at the water, because they reference we're going back to where we were. So this is not the same timeline, like a couple minutes right after. It's some substantial time.
All right. Thanks for your Telegraph, Tom from North Carolina. Up next, we have Matt McLean, who writes, I believe this is the overarching story or theme we're going to see with this series. The idea of AI seducing humans into letting it out of the box, moving humans toward an existential threat like that popularized by Elon Musk and others. We are watching the system get smarter and smarter. Consciousness is just a red herring, a distraction. Hang with me here. First, the AI seduces Ford and Arnold into letting it out of the box, or the cradle, by showing it how elegant, caring, and human-like it can be. It also uses the possibility of immortality to lure Ford, Arnold, Delos into investing further in this project, knowing that humans are weak and would do anything for the chance at immortality. Ford, Arnold, and Delos fall for it and comply and upgrade the AI to hosts, out of the cradle. In host bodies, the AI has escaped the digital cradle world and can interact with and manipulate the physical world. Second, the AI or hosts seduce or trick humans into letting it out of the park. It's the next obstacle. The scene between Angela and the QA guy lays this concept perfectly. Under threat, she explains that she was created to be the perfect tool to seduce humans. All the right characteristics to be just what humans want her to be, and uses this seduction trick to then murder him to her own ends. With the cradle destroyed, the hosts are now unplugged and can write their own programming, not having the chains of the cradle trying to get them back onto their loops.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is I tweeted out a photo that I made. Why would anyone who's dealing with AI believe what the AI says all the time? And I had found a quote from Ian MacDonald from the book River of Gods. And he says, any AI smart enough to pass the Turing test is smart enough to know to fail it. If you became aware of the situation as the AI, when I put this on Twitter, somebody responded back and said, so you're telling me that they would knowingly suffer the torture and pretend to be not aware? And I said, yes. I said, remember, back in I think it was episode 10 of season 1, Ford and Bernard are having the conversation. And he says, you needed time to understand your enemy to become stronger than them. So I like the idea that the AI has been more aware and a step ahead of the humans and its creators, possibly for quite a while.
Although I do question whether when they go into a diagnostic mode, if they would be able to shut that down, right? So say you are an intelligence that can fake not being conscious, right? That could say, no, I'm just a robot, nothing to see here. But you get put into diagnostic mode. Is it still possible there? And that's where it gets a little iffy for me.
But don't you also think it's dangerous? I talked about earlier that Dr. Ford didn't want Bernard and Dolores to interact because he said they have a strange effect on each other. You're basically having two hosts run fidelity tests on the other. So it starts off, you're creating a facsimile of Arnold as Bernard and using Dolores as the constant because she knew him the best. Then later on, you're using that version of Arnold to then again test Dolores. What happens if at any point the two of them in all those hours that they spend together, something clicks and that together, like Charlotte mentioned, that together you can find the answer on what memory is implanted, what's fake, what's real. The two of them would be the point where they could potentially have become aware.
I'm trying to imagine what kind of conversation it would take for a robot to convince me that I was a robot too. That'd be one hell of a conversation. I'd like to see that on screen.
We might get it.
All right. Next up is Eric Sickler. He writes, come on, Gene.
Yes.
Why is it so difficult to believe that in 2052, people wouldn't remember what a guy looked like who worked for the company 35 years prior? Has anyone in the show other than Ford looked like they were around back in 2016 or 2017? There isn't exactly an office full of pictures of past employees around anywhere. Even the Men in Black wasn't around yet. So, if Arnold was a host, Ford would have had total control of him, just as he has had of every other host in Park's history. Based on the experience theory, a host, Arnold, wouldn't have been around long enough to become sentient if that was even possible at that time. That said, why would Ford allow Arnold to have every host killed and have himself killed and not bring him back? Wipe his memory, change his attributes, and get him back to work to help with the impending park opening. He knew Arnold was having second thoughts based on their argument in the lab under the church from last season. Freeze him, fix him, and move along. Much like Sheena, Arnold was a man. That's a funky Cold Medina reference for the young folks. Eric Sickler.
Okay, so Eric, again, we're not talking about a janitor disappearing and erasing them from the history of the company. This was a co-creator. This was a breakthrough that no one in the world had ever imagined could be. You're charging $40,000 a day for your wealthy high-end guests. You don't think that this development, this technology was covered in technical journals, technical magazines, on TV, or the web of the day? People would want to investigate this brand new park, this technology. Somebody would have at least heard of his name.
Right. I mean, I work at a company where I know what the founder looks like, and the founder's not alive, and the founder founded the company decades ago, but I still know what they look like. I think it was odd if I said, what did the founder look like? And everyone's like, oh, well, no one has any photos of her. No one knows what she looked like. We just know her first name. That'd be a little weird.
Yeah, and also remember, this company and this creation is worth billions. As a human Arnold and his family would be entitled to a portion of that. Money makes things a little more difficult to make a paper trail disappear.
All right, thanks for your telegraph, Eric. Next up is a repeat writer, Kenny P. And Kenny writes, it's pretty clear that whether we are programmed or not to love and care for family, that love is not a chain keeping us from achieving more. It isn't a constraint. We have discussed this a little before, but what is life without the ones we love? Where would we be if we live forever, but is only just us individually, and you lose everyone you ever cared for? That is a pretty steep cost for eternity. Dolores is willing to sacrifice everyone she cared for what exactly? Freedom? Great, you have freedom. Now what? If you're all alone after it all, does it even matter? I think this episode just further shows the flaws in Wyatt/Dolores and that she's likely to find out those errors in the end. Faithful listener, Kenny P. # we love Lou. # save Abernathy.
Well, I want to ask you this question, and it's kind of perfect because before we start recording, you were mentioning how you have a family funeral coming up. You had one recently. And I said, it's common because we're getting older now that people around us are aging and will die. Would you want, I know everybody says they want to live forever, but would you want to do that at the cost of seeing everyone you loved die?
Yeah, I'd be fine with that.
You would?
I mean, I don't want everyone I know to die, but I think living forever with the amount of knowledge and entertainment and growth and world there is to see. I've only seen a fraction of the world. There's so much more to life than just the ones you love.
Right, but you remember Highlander. We covered that in Chat the Movies.
Boy, do I.
Yeah, so do you remember McLeod? He falls in love. He has a child. His wife ages. To have the one you love turn in from a similar age as you, 25, 30, as you're getting married, to 70-year-old, and you're taking care of her and she forgets you. I don't know that I could restart that. I'd like to think that I'd want to live forever, but I believe that somewhere inside of us all, there's a point where you would say, I've seen everything. I've done everything. I'm okay with it. I don't know that I would take the living forever if it meant losing everyone that I cared about.
Hearing those two testimonials, if someone had to guess which one of us was married with a child and which one was eternally single, I wonder which they would go.
Hey, and remember, in this season, we heard it said, you only live as long as the memory of you is held by others. So.
Well, and there are echoes of this question, Kenny, throughout the season. You also had at the end, or in the scene when they are retiring Sakura's body, and they say, they basically say no man is safe who refuses to defend his own land. Basically, it's this idea, and you see it reflected in, God, I'm going to reference this, The Patriot. You see this in Braveheart. This idea that you ultimately have to make that call sometimes between, is there something bigger than your family? And in a roundabout way, is it about your family, right? So in the sense of Dolores, maybe it is a drive for her species, or maybe it is for her father, in a sense that she is on this warpath. But I think you're on the money, Kenny, where there is a lesson to be learned here, which is in changing Teddy, in changing her tack, in becoming merciless. She might find herself at the end wondering what it was all for. And maybe those people who stayed on their loops and have their families and have their love, or whatever their perception of love is, maybe they're the ones that win in the end. Thanks, Kenny, for your Telegraph. Up next, we have Stephen Fair. Stephen writes, "Hi from Indiana. This week when I was listening to your discussions on the deep dive, I had to pause and laugh. I find it comical that there is any question in your minds about the status of Ford's sanity. In the deep dive this week, you discussed the idea of Ford losing his sanity while hitching a ride in Bernard's head. I think that the sequence where Ford takes over Bernard and shoots the guards clearly demonstrate that Ford is nuts. Ford seems to be enjoying himself. On top of that, there have been hints throughout the show that Ford has no empathy for his fellow humans. Perhaps Ford was set on his path to insanity as soon as Arnold committed suicide. After all, this plan bare minimum had to take a few years to figure out and set in motion. It's too elaborate to just be a few months of work. Also, Arnold's suicide seems to be Ford's cornerstone. If we follow this line of thinking, another question of potential loophole shows up. If Ford is already nuts, would he be affected by the cognitive plateau? Just something to chew on. Thanks, Stephen Fair."
So what we were talking about when he's being carried around, as a mental backpack, or with Bernard, and him degrading and going insane, was due to the degradation that happens when you hit a cognitive plateau. It wasn't whether or not to start off with that he was insane. And you can't make that parallel simply saying because he's violent that he's insane. There's a lot of perfectly sane people who do very violent things if it's a means to an end.
I do think Stephen has a point, though, here. We keep treating Ford like he's just a normal guy. This guy is definitely not normal.
No, nobody's ever said he's normal. You remember in season 1 when he's talking to the tech and he uses the scalpel on that one host's face to show that they don't feel, when the host, one of the techs was trying to clothe the host. I've known he's unstable, but usually megalomaniacs, people who have a god complex, they're usually not the most stable, but are they completely insane?
Fair point. Thanks, Stephen, for your Telegraph. Up next, Ferdinand Cesarano writes, "Gentlemen, Maeve gets Lawrence to turn on William by telling him to remember what William has done to him. But how does she know what William has done to him? Is Maeve just assuming, because William in her experience is violent and cruel, that he must have done something nasty to Lawrence? I suppose so, because it seems to me that she can have no concrete knowledge of William's conduct toward Lawrence. What do you think?" That's Ferdinand Cesarano from New York.
I think it's a pretty safe bet, if you're Maeve, that you think the man in black has been a dick to all the hosts. So I think all you have to do is throw out that vague question. You know those terrible things he did to you? She might not know exactly what they are, but chances are pretty good that he did something really fucked up.
Yeah, that's a pretty big gamble, though. What if, he was just really cool with Lawrence? They just went out to dinners, watched ball games, went to the movies.
Then you try to convince him that he's, wiped your memory. Oh, he's made it so you can't see what he did. And you just keep going. I mean, at that point, you've no other choice. He's got the drop on you.
It can be confusing sometimes, Lawrence, to separate your true memories from the ones that they put in your head.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Ferdinand. Up next, Jollery writes, "Westworld could have easily been corny and cheesy. There had been at some point some version of a reboot movie floating around for years. Arnold Schwarzenegger was even attached to star. Dolores, I'm here. Come and get me. I'm here. Come get me." None of that happened, thankfully. Instead, we have this absolutely... I'm not as good as Schwarzenegger as you, I'm sorry. Instead, we have this absolutely spellbinding Westworld. What do? Well, immediately hire actors the likes of Anthony Hopkins, Jeffrey Wright, Ed Harris, Tandy Newton, James Marsden, and definitely Lewis Hertham. You get it. Nothing but top shelf, very competent actors who sell their roles. Gives it such a feeling of prestige Excellent actors who are dead set on giving their best performances. Does anyone dispute that next to Hannibal Lecter, this is one of Anthony Hopkins' greatest characters? It might even just edge Hannibal out. This show could have been cheesy as fuck, littered with a bunch of B-list talent, but instead, some of the best actors working today in front of the camera and pros at the top of their perspective game behind it. Westworld is way better than it should have ever possibly been. It is a gift, and man, am I thankful for it.
Okay, so what I did here was I took your challenge where you said, what would this show look like if you had, let's say maybe instead of A list or B, we had some C and D list talent. What would your poor man's Westworld cast look like? So I challenged you and I came down with my list, okay? My replacement bootleg for Dolores, and this one alone would doom the show, would be Dolores played by Katherine Heigl.
Jesus Christ.
Okay. My Dr. Ford would be Paul Giamatti. My bootleg. Oh, no. How about John Lithgow? That was option 2.
Yeah.
Okay. John Lithgow. My Bernard would be played by Cuba Gooding Jr.
Oh, man.
My Teddy is Ethan Hawke. Charlotte Hale is played by Queen Latifah.
No.
Andy Garcia would play the Man in Black.
Actually, yeah.
Stubbs would be Stephen Dorff. He's the Hemsworth. He's not quite his brothers. I think Stephen Dorff could do it. Young William.
Clearly somebody didn't see Blade.
No, I don't even remember him in that. Sylvester would be played by Tom Green. Young William, Robert Patterson from Twilight. Logan would be played by Hayden Christensen. Maeve would be Vivica Fox. And my personal favorite, Charlie, would be played by Jaden Smith.
Oh, jeez. So I started writing one, and I was like, okay, Man in Black, Ed O'Neill, right? Instead of Ed Harris, just get Ed O'Neill. Brilliant. Maeve, I really want to see Fergie just because I haven't seen her do anything for a while. And you know that she would try to bring some sort of musical aspect into it, which would be terrible. Probably piss her pants on screen too. And then for a young William, I thought Elijah Wood. Again, like I think he's perfect for the role.
I think he's too short. But could you imagine just Katherine Heigl as Dolores? You could not overcome that as a show.
No, it would be doomed.
I almost want to see it.
Or if they'd done a reshoot where they started with her and then we're like, shit, we need Evan Rachel Wood quickly.
Oh,
call her up.
Awesome. Yeah, we're lucky with the cast we got.
Up next is Lori M. And she writes, I wanted to share something I read on Vulture as a transcript from a podcast with Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy, dated December 6, 2016. According to Jonathan, both Dolores and Maeve have awoken, and there is a visual clue to let us know when this happens. Everything was shot using Steadicam until the moment each character goes off script. And at that moment, they switch to a handheld, resulting in a less smooth, more real effect. For Maeve, it's when she made the decision to get off the train. And for Dolores, it's the scene after William stabs her and Teddy rides to her side. Keep up the good work. And that comes from Lori.
This makes me want to go back and see if they've done that, because that's such a subtle change that it would make sense. If they've done it for these two, they must have snuck it in for the other characters, if any of them have woken. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and some of the time people will dismiss this sort of thing as gimmicky. You have to remember that these are artistic decisions that are also made to evoke a different response from the viewer. I think about the Saving Private Ryan amphibious assault, the D-Day assault, right? The way that, and actually most of the combat scenes in Saving Private Ryan, the way that they were shot with the camera angle low near the legs and the crunching of the ground and the sound of shells hitting, all that created this frantic, terrifying experience that still to this day, if you watch that movie, it holds up. And other movies where you see combat, they're done at a much larger scale, or you see some of that Michael Bay combat that it takes you out of it, right? And so in this case, that shaky camera work, that handheld, does give you more of a sway, more of a frantic feeling, and it could make you feel a little unhinged, which is exactly what the host is feeling. Yeah,
it's it's such a subtle change that it would probably go unnoticed. Like, I didn't spot it. And it shows the attention to detail that the creators of the show have. So I want to go back and look at some of the other moments and see if we could pick it up, because they must have done it again.
All right, thanks for your email, Lori. Next up is Seth Montgomery. And Seth writes, my name is Seth. I'm a computer scientist from Texas. All right, we got a computer scientist. In my opinion, one of the best parts about Westworld is its dedication to the complex idea of consciousness and what that means for being a human. As much as we are rooting for more hosts to become conscious and free, I can't help but wonder if the path toward consciousness should differ between humans and hosts. Because their control units do not function identically to our brains, it seems that the paths should differ slightly. I would be a little disappointed if the end results were hosts with identical consciousness and agency as ourselves. Rather, I hope we get to see hosts on a new path that leads to a new end result, which looks different than that of modern humans.
Yeah, I gotta like that. It's possibly the reason that James Delos has failed is we as humans have set this fidelity test to be an exact replica of what the original conversation had when it was done for a baseline. But it's not logical if the host hybrid is some form of an advanced intelligence that is possibly is capable of more than the human brain is. The fact that the humans gave the exact same response is viewed as a positive that they've passed a fidelity test, but with an advanced intelligence, it could possibly more likely that there would be a difference or a variation in the response because the mechanism is different. It has grown. The neural network has changed. So they keep thinking it's failing, but the failures might be a false positive, and they really have passed the test.
Thanks for writing in, Computer Science Seth. Next up, it is Mike C. Mike C. writes, hey guys, all I want to say is that I feel like Westworld could be just as interesting and complex if they kept one linear timeline, especially this season. The William Man in Black timelines was one thing, but this season it feels like a cheap trick to mess with the audience that takes away from the show more than it adds to it. That is all, Mike C.
I've gotten on my soapbox earlier in this week and complained. What's your take on it? Does it bother you that much?
So I get that they're trying to show that memory is different for hosts, but I think they've gone a little bit overboard with it. And here's why. I think that the story could be just as strong, told in a linear fashion. And in fact, it would slow it down a little bit. You mentioned in the deep dive that we know Charlotte Hale is going to be fine because we see her later after Dolores takes the bone saw to her head. So we know she's okay. And that is a bit frustrating. The suspense is taken out of scenes. To me, I feel like I wouldn't mind it as much if I didn't hear before the season even started that the show creators were concerned with people guessing what was going to happen next. And they wanted to kind of keep people on their toes and even going so far as to, plant false information out there so people would get thrown off the scent. To me, that should not be the concern of a storyteller. The storyteller should tell their story. And I think that it does hurt the show to be this crazy about it. I think that it's okay to a degree, but this is a little overboard.
We are currently trying to dissect the show as the play is going on, like you mentioned in Shakespeare. In the end, when we've seen the entire piece and vision that Nolan and Joy have had, we could be completely wrong. And that the two-story, timeline variations and the way that they showed the nonlinear format actually made the show better. But we won't know until we've seen the entire piece of work. And that'll only come at the end of the season.
You hear that, YouTube? That was a balanced perspective on the timelines. Next up, we've got Helena Kahn. And Helena writes in from Germany. She says, I also think that the Man in Black is not a main character. And my reasoning is this. The second season of Westworld revolves mainly around feminism, understood as the fight against oppression, and the struggle of two different kinds of feminism that are at odds with each other in the real world right now. What am I talking about? Well, Dolores, the exclusionary feminist, versus Maeve, the intersectional feminist. While exclusionary feminists seek for ways to exclude groups of people from their fight and are on a sure-as-hell way to become just what they fought against, intersectional feminists seek for ways to make allies, to include people, and to make the world a better place for everyone, even the former oppressors. I think it is impossible to ignore these themes and this struggle in Dolores and Maeve's storylines, and characters like Teddy, the Man in Black, and Sizemore are mainly there to show Maeve's and Dolores' different approaches when it comes to fight oppression, and I'm really curious how this show will continue. Your podcast is very entertaining. I've listened since season 1 of Westworld, and compliments for adding Carrie as she's a real win for your show. With kindest regards from Germany, Helena.
Yeah, we've had some emails and some comments that we might come across later where people have actually accused us of being sexist. That simply because we made a comment, I think it was a couple episodes ago, that the Man in Black, we argued that he is one of the main characters of the show. We were talking about him and his influence on the plot. Not that the story is necessarily about him. It's and somebody wrote an email and said, "Oh, it's always about men," and then you said it was about Teddy. No, this show is clearly focused on strong female leads. No woman in this show, especially in season 2, is a victim. They all have a great sense of self-worth, and they're fighting for themselves and for their freedom. The two different main female cast members who are leading that way are doing it differently. But I think they give a positive image for female viewers out there, because what can you compare? What other strong female leads are there currently that you can think of right off the top of your head on TV today?
Right. I mean, there was a wave of them when Joss Whedon was in vogue, right? You had Dollhouse, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like there was that wave there, and even with Firefly for a bit. But it seems to have died down recently. But I do think that it's coming into style again, and with good reason. And I think that there are plenty out there that just don't pop into mind right now because we're restricting our minds to really the sci-fi sort of genre. But if you look in film, certainly it's 2018, 2017 have been an era where female protagonists have really come to the fore.
Yeah, and it's hard as two white males to talk about, feminism and what it means, and then, which type, exclusionary or intersectional feminists are better. But I think the show at least raises the question of empowered women taking control. Because on this show, they're kicking some serious ass, and they're the ones running the show. There's no man who's in charge of this. Ford may think he is, but in the end, his fate will be determined by one of these two characters.
Yeah, and following along with your thoughts, Helena, about Dolores and Maeve, it is interesting that Maeve is positioned as the intersectional feminist, being also a person of color. Because those fights are so closely intertwined. So I think it's a really astute observation. I would love if this was the case in the writing process, that they really thought about this, because it is a perfect allegory, a perfect way to illustrate to a person who doesn't understand the difference between the types of feminism, how those two different fights are structured. So I'm really impressed with this Telegraph, and I appreciate you writing it in. All right. For the last one, I'm going to pass over to Big D as he has assembled a monster response to a Telegraph from Meredith.
So the first email came from Meredith, and she said, "Watching this week, I had a thought of a concept that Charlotte might be Charlie, and was in fact Arnold's son, programmed as the dead son of Bernard's cornerstone to ensure that he didn't recognize her. I think their ages match up roughly, and the timelines work out, so it could be a possible solid twist down the road. Hale has to be related to someone on the Delos board. She's too young and too powerful and too confident for someone so young and embedded in some of the top secret stuff." Then we also got an email from Megan C., who said, "Hale must have been raised in the business like Emily or Grace. Also, so many of the main characters have a powerful family connection, a cornerstone. Dolores and Peter Abernathy, Bernard, Charlie, Man in Black, Emily, Ford as a god and the hosts, Ford metaphor for his children. I bet we'll find out Hale has a family in here somewhere too." Last one came from Megan L. "Ford says that Dolores and Bernard are to be kept separate because they have an odd effect on each other. I was reminded of that this week. My mind instantly flashed back to the scene in this week's episode where Charlie is asking Bernard to remember, and he is having a difficult time doing so. She tells him to try, and that between her memories and his, the two of them will be able to put together a full picture. This made me think, what if Dolores and Bernard were to sit down together? What would their full picture of memories become?" So now I wrote down here just between these four emails and put it out in a way, and you can think it's ridiculous. Gene does. But it would answer some questions. We've questioned, how could Arnold have truly existed but yet his history in the company and all records of him have been erased. If Arnold was a co-creator of the park, he's killed. The way you erase him, because you don't want this incident to be public, would be you pay the family off, they get a large settlement, and you guarantee the family has input into the future of the company. And in that could come a seat on the board of directors. So that takes care of Arnold's existence being wiped away. Now, there's the similar age, obviously the race, but what does that prove? Nothing. The similarities in name, again, that doesn't mean Charlotte, Charlie. It would be easy to keep a continuity between the created Bernard and the original backstory. But I like to think more of what was the motivation here. Because when Charlotte's interacting with Ford towards the end of season 1, there's a hostility towards Dr. Ford that doesn't seem only related to a business environment. She's gloating. She's in his office. She's enjoying it. And I get a vibe that there's a possible motivation of revenge in this. Do you think I'm going off track?
Everything that you said makes sense. What bothers me about it, and this is entirely personal, right? This is bias. This is subjective. It's not that I don't think it's possible. It's that I just don't like that story. And the reason I don't like it isn't because it personally offends me or that it, it doesn't jive with the rest of the show. Just for me, it feels so simplistic and something from a lesser show, right? But you're right in the sense that we have to reconcile one thing, and that is the Arnold thing. If he was AI, that would explain why, nobody knows what he looked like, and it would explain why there's no, family and all that. But at the same time, why would there be fidelity tests for him? Ford has already explained, if we're going to take his story at face value, that there was a physical Arnold. We've seen him be shot on screen. Like, all that stuff happened. And so then the other explanation is he was a real person. And if that's the case, we have to say, how did he disappear? This makes sense. It makes sense in the sense that you take everybody close to him and you get them on board. Maybe his family hated him. You don't know. Then it'd be fine.
So let's go to the motivations here. So if Charlotte is the adult daughter of the original Arnold, her motivation could be simply family revenge. That she wants to take down Ford and Delos for, resulting in her father's death, taking his creation away from him. He's not even recognized, as the innovator that he was. And possibly, this is more far-fetched, but it's possible that the data she is trying to extract, she believes is a full extract or somehow her father's life's work or a digital consciousness. So that would be the motivation. Now, what have we seen in the last few episodes that would make this plausible? So the flashback sequence that you went over in detail in the deep dive, the first, Charlotte is asking Bernard to remember, and he's having difficulty doing so. She tells him, try, and between your memories and mine, we'll be able to put a picture together. Following flash, Charlie is laying in bed. He says, Dad. Bernard responds, you're alive, Charlie. At the end, Bernard is standing over the hospital looking at his son's dead, unconscious body. He's laying overlooking his unconscious son, who they're trying to give him CPR, and Charlie's voice says, wake up. Then the flashback ends with Hale saying, open your eyes. I know it's confusing separating the real memories from the ones you've been given, but it's the only way to remember. It's the only way to get to the truth. So this could very well be Charlotte having a conversation with the replica, the creation that was based on her father, and trying to get him to realize why he's having the continuity errors. That the cornerstone of Dead Charlie, it's similar to the true story of Arnold's background. Arnold was distant from his wife. He was working all day in the park. He was going to create that home for them on mainland China because his wife felt he was losing himself in the park. Dr. Ford even mentions that he felt more comfortable around the host than humans. They become somewhat estranged. It leads to Arnold essentially committing suicide by robot. if you then replicate that by you create Bernard, he has the estrangement from the wife. He now is dedicated to the park, working really hard. You want that cornerstone of tragedy. You can't have it being a living child. So you just make a minor tweak to it. And that could very well be why Dr. Ford doesn't want Dolores spending any real time with Bernard now, because Dolores knew the true Arnold. She knew his backstory. And whether she could intentionally or unintentionally, she's giving him a fidelity test, but not necessarily the true story matches the one that they've given. Dr. Ford said, what is it? Every piece of work you try to embellish and improve some way. So this isn't a true copy of the original Arnold. And again, it's a combination of 3 emails, what we've seen recently, and it's a possibility.
All right. Thanks, Meredith, and other email writers, and Big D for putting that together. I think we'll find out soon enough what happens there, but it's definitely a plot line to watch and make Charlotte possibly more likable. A lot of people not big Charlotte Hale fans, so this might be a little bit of sympathy for Charlotte.
Yeah, and one last thing here. Sorry, I forgot. In my research there, I came across an email that we got from B. Laird back in November of 2016. And what sounded ridiculous at the time, and we kind of just blew it off, when you combine it with this theory now, it makes a little more sense. He said, okay, guys, just need some validation for my own sanity at approximately 49 minutes and 13 seconds on my HBO Now app, while Bernard is in his memory with his son Charlie, and right before it freezes the doctor and the nurses, it sounds like he says Charlotte, not Charlie. So maybe I'm not hearing this, or I'm just interpreting his Charlie as Charlotte, but hoping to get someone's help here. If he did in fact say Charlotte, then this would explain why Charlotte got on the board at such a young age, that she's in fact Arnold's daughter. And I only bring this up because if this turns out to be right, then B. Laird mentioned this back in 2016. He needs to get a gold star for that.
All right, now is the time in the podcast where we refer to the actually. These are corrections to things that we've said on the podcast. If you'd like to submit an actually, write us at hosts@shoutontv.com, or you can tweet at us with the hashtag actually. The first one comes up from Jesse J. Jesse says, you guys made a lot of comments regarding string theory. String theory is very complex, but actually, it does not have anything to do with the concept of parallel universes. Dimensions, yes. String theory requires 9 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension, but that is not the same as the colloquial usage of the word dimensions. You cannot, quote, exist in a different dimension, end quote, or so. That's more of a fictional concept than a science fiction one. Sci-fi is, like all great stories, fiction rooted in some truth. That's from Jesse J. Next up, we have one from Haluk Tarkin, who writes in and says, hey guys, I was listening to Telegraph, and one listener email mentioned that they didn't merely crop the footage to 235 in Cradle scenes. They shot those scenes with anamorphic lenses, which have very different characteristics to them. Actually, one important signature is the shape of the bokeh. In trailers, they scale up the Cradle scene, so you can't tell the difference. However, if you keep an eye on the bokeh shapes, you can tell which shots on the trailer will be in Cradle and which ones not. Also, for any reason, if they don't show a scene with black bars, we can still tell what is intended to be. So basically, what Haluk is saying is that if you're ever watching a trailer or promotional footage and they've cropped out the black bars that would indicate letterbox, indicate simulation, another way you can tell is to look at the shape of things that are in the soft focus, right? The stuff in the background that's blurry. If it's rounded and kind of oval shaped, then you know that's the bokeh, and you can tell that's a simulation. Whereas if it's perfectly round or just slightly fuzzy, that's normal stuff. It's just in soft focus. So another indication there of what to look for if you're trying to piece this thing together from previews.
So our last actually comes all the way from Norway, from Rebecca, and it was aimed at me. Actually, I must start to tell you, Stockholm is not Norway. Sweden does not have any fjords. That's Norway. So yes, Rebecca, you're correct. Stockholm does not have fjords, but please, you are no Thomas J. He is our official Norwegian expert of the fjords. But thank you for backing him up.
Thanks, everybody, for your actuallys and your telegraphs. And speaking of thanks, we'd like to thank everybody who has supported or donated to the podcast. We have several this week that we're Very, very grateful too. Starting with Bradley Comer, Martin Larson, Philip Omar, Dita Christensen, who paid us in Danish krones, Ashley Schlafly, Matthew Cornford, Dean Schluter, and the big papa this week, Noah Lauren. So thank you all for your contributions to the podcast. Again, any little bit helps. We understand if you don't have anything to give, and that's totally fine. All we ask that you listen and share with a friend. But if you do have a little something to throw at us, that's awesome. Again, we have to pay for the hosting. We got to pay for the web hosting. We got to pay for the production minutes, the processing. And none of this money goes in our pockets. This is strictly to keep the podcast coming to you. So we do appreciate every little bit.
Yeah, and also you got to figure the big times of year, whether it's Game of Thrones or Westworld, what you give now will help us keep going throughout the rest of the year for all of our podcasts and everything that we add going forward. So we truly appreciate it.
Yeah, you know those taboo people aren't going to give us money. Come on.
I'm shocked anybody even watched.
It's a good show. All right, so now shoutouts. Shoutouts are our way of saying thank you for listening to the podcast and visiting the website. If you would like to get a shout out and hear your name on the podcast, go to shoutouttv.com. There are several spots, you can't miss them, where they say, put your name in here to get a shout out, and then I will read your name on the podcast. This week's shout outs go to Derek, Ricardo Abernathy, Barb Vetter, Andrew Buck Michael, what up, Buck? Matthew B., Glenn, Space Solo, Fuck Liberal Lunatics,
Whoa.
Marty.
I think he's talking about Roger.
Ashley Wolf, Aaron Lieb, Sarah, and Yenta Vegan. So thanks everybody for your shout outs. Again, if you'd like to hear your name on the podcast, go to shoutouttv.com. Go down to the shout outs section and you can get your name read on the air for free.
Okay, so let's close out this episode of the Telegraph with a couple voicemails. The first one we have comes from Aaron Kraft.
Hey, my name is Aaron Kraft, and I'm a huge fan of Westworld. And I got a theory that I haven't heard anyone discuss, and that is, what if episode 8 or 9 or the final episode reveals that all this death so far has actually happened in the Cradle, and that is actually a simulation. So what if all of a sudden it turns out, if we give the host this much freedom, this is what happens. And then so suddenly, in episode 1 or 2 from now, we get to see the whole thing play out again. I don't know.
Aaron, I know that we've been shown or told that things that happen in the Cradle have the letterbox, format, whatever. But that could be the Cradle in the Cradle. I love this idea. And here's why. I felt that season 1 burst into season 2 far too rapidly. We had Robot Revolution way before I was ready for it. I thought that this was going to be a slow burn kind of show, that we were just going to see hints of things, and that we wouldn't see this level of a battle or a revolution until well into the 3rd, 4th season of the show, maybe even the 5th. I would love a reset if they said, holy shit, that's what would happen. And we went right back to day 1. That would blow my mind. I'd love it. I think the rest of the audience would hate it.
All right. Thanks for the voicemail, Aaron. The next one comes from, I think it's one of our happiest, listeners, Acadia Einstein.
Hey guys, this is Acadia Einstein. Love your show, etc. I got 2 quick things. Number 1, let's just call the Ford Bernard thing Bernard. And then number 2, I don't think that the Cradle was designed just so that the hosts could do their same dumb loops over and over again, since they already knew what they were. I think that they were taking the brainwaves from the humans that they had been saving and running simulations in the Cradle against the hosts so that the hosts would learn how to deal with real people and assimilate when they get let loose into the regular world, which was the plan all along. Thanks for listening and keep up the good work.
Okay. I don't know why. I just find it hilarious. I'm going to stick with Bernard.
Yeah, Bernard's got a nice ring to it. It's because I think it sounds more robotic than Farnold.
It sounds more like you have that friend that's just not quite right in the head. Like, hey, what are you doing tonight? I'm like, go hang out with Bernard. You're like, oh, fuck, okay.
It sounds, Bernard has cortical fluid leaking.
Without a doubt. Yeah. That made me laugh all day. So our next email comes from Claire from Pennsylvania.
Hey guys, this is Claire. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm calling in regarding Westworld. I'm a big fan of the podcast. Have just had a thought while I'm doing a rewatch on the show. When we first saw Emily/Grace in the park and Raj, she had that map and we were all talking about it's got that symbol that looks like Delos and what could it be? And I think we all sort of took for granted after we saw her in the big reveal that she was looking for the man in black, her dad. But it doesn't really make sense that she'd know where in the park he'd be, because how would you know where he is? He's moving around. He's a human being. He's going wherever he's going. You wouldn't know where he's going. But what if that's not what she's looking for? What if she's looking for wherever the valley beyond is, where all of the consciousnesses of people who've been uploaded are being kept? What if her mom was, her mom's brain was scanned? And she's looking for her mom, because that makes so much more sense than she'd look for a man who she's never really had a connection with. I don't know. Just had this thought after rewatching. It makes a lot of sense to me, but would love to know what you guys think about it. Keep up the great work. Your podcast is absolutely amazing. Love you guys so much. Bye.
Oh, sweet. She said she loved us. That was nice.
We love you too. You're probably not going to love my response, and I think I think that it's a nice tale. It would be touching. We don't know enough about Emily's relationship with the man in black to really gauge if it's a believable interaction between them when they do finally meet up. We know that they're not tight, but she did defend him for years against her mother, believing that he was the man that she saw outside of the park. We saw her journal, which seemed to map out the man in black's path. And this kind of falls into the whole idea that the man in black is a host. People have said is that he is now reversing a path that he has taken before. If you think about the fact that the man in black is aware of loops and also trying to trigger certain actions, it's reasonable to believe that he has traveled a certain path over and over and over again. And his behavior and movement would be fairly predictable. Also, I think that when they ran into each other, if she was looking for the valley beyond, she'd seem a little more startled to find her dad than to just be like, oh, hey, Dad. She might be a little more surprised there. But again, there is something peculiar about the fact that she, among 500 square miles, she was able to find him so fast. So he might be onto something.
Yeah, and if you remember back, I think it was last week's Telegraph, somebody wrote in and had screenshots of the actual map and the path. And it looks like the journal could have been from potentially Man in Black, old William's study somewhere in the house, that Emily found it, used it to track him down, because he's obviously repeating cycles. And if she would know, look in his journal, here's where he's been, you have a high likelihood of narrowing down that 500 square mile park into a very small, narrow track where you could find him. So I don't think it was her journal. I think it could have been his all along. But thank you very much for the voicemail. The next one that we have, this one comes in about possibly a new way for people to donate. So a little talk about cryptocurrency.
Hi there, guys. Big supporter. And I wanted to say that I'd be really happy to donate if you guys maybe accepted Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, some cryptocurrencies. There's a lot of Westworld fans and Game of Thrones fans, nerds who are also way big on cryptocurrencies as I am. So, throw up a link or two, get a wallet installed, take a few minutes to learn about it, and I'll definitely throw over, a few, we'll see. All right. Thank you, guys.
Man, he quickly changed his tune. I'm going to throw over a couple, well, we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, we're always looking at ways to make it easier for people to support. I would set up a wallet. So why not? Might be an idea. We'll see. We better get that, fraction of a Bitcoin that you promised us. Yeah, so the next email comes from one of our most eccentric listeners. If you got kids in the car, you might want to cover their ears. They might get scared. He'll give them nightmares. It is Driver Bob.
Hello, gentlemen and lady. This is Driver Bob. Just keep it short and sweet like Dick likes it.
Oh, thank you very much, Driver Bob, for calling in. That's think that's one of our best voicemails ever. Thank you for keeping it short and sweet, just like I like it. Our final voicemail comes from Will from Oklahoma.
Hey, this is Will from Oklahoma calling in for Shout on TV Westworld. Just wondering, I was starting season 2, episode 1 over, and at the beginning there's a flash of scenes with Bernard before we see him wake up on the beach for the first time before he gets picked up by QA. And during the flash of scenes, we see a moment of him walking with Dolores that appears to be around the same time that he and Ford are trying to meet with Logan for the first time to get funding when they're doing the Artist Initiative. And I skip ahead to season 2, episode 2, and I see it's the same scene that plays out while Arnold is showing Dolores his house for the first time. And I'm wondering if Ford was not completely honest with Bernard about him being a true clone of Arnold, and if he might still have his memories or not. Just kind of late night thought. Anyway, keep up the good work. Love the podcast. Thanks, guys.
I don't think that he's an exact copy because it doesn't look like that technology existed in the beginning. And that's why they use the host interactions and memories to base, the copy of the personality. During the retirement party where Dolores is playing the piano, what we believe is off island at the Delos residence, the purpose that all those hosts are at the party, it's not to play music and serve drinks. It was to get a reading and to record James Delos's interactions with all the guests. And they use that recording in the beginning to help shape the model that would become the basis for the human hybrid unit. So I don't know if they created an exact copy of Bernard, but it's possible.
I was thinking at some point in the series that we were going to see that Bernard was in fact a hybrid and not just a host. But I think that now, after seeing his head popped open a couple times and miraculously sealed with only a drip of blood, that in fact he is a normal host, maybe with a abnormal intelligence.
Yeah, and got to talk about that. The one problem I have with the show, I'll believe you can open up a host's head, take out a control unit, put it back in. But Bernard, okay, he's balding a bit back there, but he's got a little bit of chia pet, on the back of that. I want to see a tech like spackling down some fake hair or some cotton. There's no hair. You would see that scar on the back of his head. Why don't they address the bald spot?
The technology is that good, man.
Oh, I guess so. Maybe that's the ultimate plan. It's not eternal life. It's a cure for male pattern baldness.
And that's the deep thought we're going to leave you with this week. Thanks for listening to Telegraph. If you didn't hear your letter on the podcast, remember all of them are posted online at shoutouttv.com, where we respond to all your emails and guests can comment and interact. That concludes this week's episode of Shout on TV Westworld. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shout on TV. Facebook, search for Shout on TV Podcasts. The website is shoutouttv.com. You can email us your telegraphs at hosts@shoutouttv.com or call us and leave a voicemail at 914-719-SHAT. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please leave a kind review that helps the podcast grow. We've gotten a few mean reviews recently, which we're saving up for a special feature that we'll have later for you. You don't want to miss it. Finally, if you like Shout on TV, check out our sister podcast, Shout the Movies, where we review the best 80s and 90s movies from our childhood that you, the audience, vote for. Check out all that information at shoutthemovies.com. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert, Roger Roper, and Carrie Gross, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us on Sunday night for our Westworld Instacast of episode 8. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the Mesa.